Grand Prix is a race that normally attracts a lot of interest for two reasons. One, it usually means that the European leg of the F1 season is kicking off in earnest. And the second reason is that this is normally the race where most, if not all, teams will bring some form of upgrades or the other. The reasons for this, of course, are twofold. One is because of the fact that by now teams have enough data collected from other races, normally 4 or 5 in this case. There's been 5 races. They have enough data that they've collected from these races that they know what upgrades will work. And the second, of course, is that the Circuit de Catalunya in Barcelona is normally the venue for pre-season testing. And that is why teams are more comfortable with this track and also have data that relates to this particular track itself. As such, it was a very highly anticipated qualifying session that happened today in the Spanish Grand Prix, and Q3 did not disappoint in the least because the championship leader, who is of course Charles Leclerc, has taken what was a very dramatic pole in many ways. Not just because of the fact that he had a bit of a spin in the final session. He did spin and didn't actually set a time until the session was coming to a close. But there's also the fact that because of teams bringing in upgrades, he suddenly has a little bit more competition. The Red Bulls still look very, very fast, but shock horror, arguably the biggest story from this particular weekend is the fact that the Mercedes cars suddenly look very, very fast. And whatever upgrades it is that they've brought have managed to not only unlock some more speed, but also, and perhaps more importantly, drastically reduce the porpoising problems that have plagued them throughout the season. Now, porpoising, as we know, is the constant up and down bouncing of the cars, and that is going to be a common feature given that these cars employ the ground effect technique, which means that more and more air is going to be going through the car, or rather under the car, and that is what is going to help them in generating downforce. That normally causes the car to porpoise, where the car will, release an aerodynamic load and then rise up again, and that can be problematic over the long straights because the faster you go, the more the car is likely to porpoise, and we had seen the Mercedes cars struggle with this particular problem a lot. This weekend, though, they've brought in a few upgrades, and this is the second time they've brought in upgrades because, as we know, they had upgrades in the Miami Grand Prix as well, but those didn't work out as well as intended. However, whatever it is they've done to their car setups or whatever new changes they've made to the certain parts of the car, it's worked out in an absolute treat simply because the porpoising has been drastically reduced, and what's more, their cars look much faster. In fact, if you were watching the broadcast, you would see that a lot of the times they were comparing straight line speeds, and that the Mercedes were in fact the fastest on the straights, faster than not just the Ferraris, who we know have struggled with a bit of straight line speed, but also the Red Bulls, who have had very, very good straight line speed. So that has been a positive development for the Mercs in that regard, that they will be looking to build on because they've also qualified very well. But it was a bit of a weekend to forget for the Red Bulls because, well, Sergio Perez could only qualify fifth on the given day. But what was even worse was that even though Verstappen only managed to get to second, the fact of the matter is that he couldn't set a faster lap because, once again, they've had a reliability issue. He said that he was losing power over the team radio and he was asked to box. He couldn't set a final lap, which could have maybe helped challenge Leclerc's timing. But that being said, it's also worth noting that Leclerc had a bit of a turnaround of his own. He started Q3, he looked to be going well, but then he spun just before the end of just before the start finish line and then had to abort that lap. So with the final 3 minutes on the clock, he didn't actually have a time set. He was only the 10th fastest driver. There was definitely pressure on him. And how does he respond? Well, he only went and set the fastest lap of the session, and he now has pole position. So that's great news for Ferrari because they have lost some ground to the Red Bulls in the last 2 races. So them starting on pole, good advantage for them. Whether or not they can exploit that, again, remains to be seen. But it's a good start to the weekend for them. What's even better is that Carlos Sainz, who in recent the races had been struggling just a tad, had a decent enough showing. He starts on P3 behind Verstappen, so naturally Ferrari will be hoping that Sainz can get the jump on Verstappen early on and they can get a 1-2 finish. That would be great news for if you're a Ferrari fan, but as I said, there is competition in the form of the Mercedes. George Russell, who looked fantastic in qualifying and in fact even in the free practices, he was outdoing Hamilton, has set the fourth fastest time, and I'm pretty sure he would want to continue his streak of not only finishing in the top five but also maybe compete for a podium as well. Lewis Hamilton was looking much better, but still looks a little bit off the pace compared to someone like, say, George Russell as well as the others. Nevertheless, he managed to finish sixth fastest, so that is a good enough thing for him. Whereas for the others, there's been a bit of a mixed time, because you had Valtteri Bottas, who's been solid all season, finished seventh, not too bad. Kevin Magnussen, who's been a revelation since he's returned to Haas, continues his strong run to the season so far. He starts P8 tomorrow. Dan Ricciardo, who's had a torrid time at McLaren for the most part this season, starts P9. And I think this will be one of those rare times where he's actually out-qualified Lando Norris, but there's a context to that as well. Remember, Lando Norris should have been in Q3, or could have been in Q3, but he had his final lap time deleted due to a track limits, to violating that track limits and exceeding those track limits. He had his time deleted, so he dropped into 11th, and as a result, Mick Schumacher managed to get into Q10 again. He starts 10th in the race, so that is a massive thing for the Haas's as well, that they have both of their cars in the top 10. But again, the biggest story of this season will be, of course, the championship battle and how that plays out in this particular race, because as we know, Leclerc started the season strongly, but Red Bull had begun to claw things back. They won the last two races, and especially in the Miami Grand Prix, you could see that there was a clear deficit when it came to straight line speeds. The Red Bulls were clearly more advantageous. But in this race, now suddenly there's also the fact that they're going to have to compete with the Mercedes cars. Now, obviously, the Mercedes cars started free practice 1 and 2, which is held on Friday, looking in very good form. They did, in fact, have a very good run, but they also looked very strong in free practice during the Miami Grand Prix as well. But when it came to qualifying, their pace just disappeared. However, the positive for them is that their pace did not, in fact, disappear during qualifying. They look consistently strong. So suddenly, this looks like it could be a three-way battle between the teams. And no, I'm not saying that the Mercedes cars are suddenly going to become championship-winning races cars. Of course not. But they have made improvements. They've cut the deficit to the leaders, and it would be a positive sign for them, because so far, whilst they have been the third best team, they've been best of the rest by a considerable distance to the top two. Today, there were times when they were matching or even outdoing on occasion the fastest cars, so that's good news. It's also good news if you're a fan, because now it suddenly means that there's three different teams in the fray competing potentially for not just wins, but also podium finishes in the top five. That will also be something worth watching out for tomorrow. God of Rai, and I'm getting a comment here saying Checo will surprise. I do agree with that, because Perez normally is not the best of qualifiers. He's rarely, if ever, been a good qualifying driver, but his race sense is always very, very good. So it wouldn't surprise me to see if he, actually ends up making up for starting only P5 in the race tomorrow. Checo has, in fact, done that, and he will win with the safety car. Well, let's see. I mean, I don't know how true that would be, but, if a safety car does pop up tomorrow, doesn't seem very likely. Spain is not normally one of those circuits where, big crashes or anything happen. In fact, in recent years, it's unfortunately developed a bit of a reputation of being a boring race. So maybe that changes tomorrow. Who knows? Let's wait and watch. But Red Bull do clearly have some work to do, because I think the bigger concern for them will be not where they've ended Q3, but the fact that their reliability issues, which actually had disappeared for the most part, seem to be back, because Verstappen out of nowhere, he said he was losing power, couldn't do a lap after that. He might just have had a shot at, pole position, so who really knows? If he had gotten a chance to set another lap, which he was on course to do, he might just have been able to push Leclerc a little bit more. But as things stand, the Ferraris, who have been way reliable throughout this season, will be starting on P1, P3. That's not too bad. That is exactly where they would actually be wanting to be. Maybe you could say that Carlos Sainz could have been starting higher, but again, P3 is not the worst place. And of course, speaking of Carlos Sainz, it is worth mentioning that this is going to be his home race. And in fact, of the two Spaniards on the grid right now, the other being Fernando Alonso, he's the one who stands the best chance of actually claiming a win. Will he be able to do that? I mean, it remains to be seen, because, he would have to actually get ahead of not only Verstappen, but Leclerc, remember, is the clear favorite in the title race. Will he be able to get past him? Will he be allowed to get past him? Will team orders kick in? We don't really know any of these things. Not yet, at least not until they happen. So I don't know about you guys, but I'm going to be watching tomorrow's race with very, very keen interest. Not just because I expect a half decent race, because as we know, these cars are very, very good when it comes to following. So we might just see some more overtaking, but also to see some of these subplots play out. I mean, I'm very interested to see if Sainz can actually finally start pushing Leclerc, or will he eventually, in the next coming races, actually end up becoming the de facto support driver to Leclerc? I mean, we'll know soon enough. We'll know how well the Red Bulls do. We'll know how well the Mercs do. We're also going to be keeping an eye out on how the other cars are, because of course this year, teams are developing at a rate of knots, and sometimes qualifying pace doesn't necessarily equate to race pace. So I will see you guys tomorrow for the race. As of now, I'm taking your leave. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it, share it with your friends, drop us a comment below, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I am, as always, Shane Dias. I'll see you guys very soon. Bye bye for now.